You're Robert Redford, Hollywood's golden boy, standing in front of hundreds of crew members and extras on one of the biggest movie sets of the decade. The cameras are rolling, the director calls action, and suddenly you feel something strange in your pocket. You reach in, pull it out, and what you discover makes your face turn 50 shades of red while Paul Newman stands across from you with that mischievous grin that could light up a room. The entire crew erupts into laughter so loud they have to stop filming, and in that moment, you realize you've just been pranked by one of the greatest practical jokers in Hollywood history. But this wasn't just any prank. What Newman hid in Redford's costume that day would become the stuff of legend, a story that actors would whisper about for decades, and a perfect example of the friendship that defined an era of American cinema. Before we dive into that unforgettable moment, you need to understand something crucial. Paul Newman and Robert Redford weren't just co-stars who showed up, said their lines, and went home. These two men forged a friendship so genuine, so rare in the cutthroat world of Hollywood, that it changed the way we think about male bonding on screen. Their chemistry wasn't manufactured by studio executives or crafted by brilliant screenwriters, though they certainly had those too. No. What Newman and Redford shared was something infinitely more valuable: mutual respect wrapped in relentless pranking, genuine affection expressed through constant one-upmanship, and a brotherhood forged in the fires of two iconic films that would define both of their careers. Let's start with the players in this legendary tale. Paul Newman, born in 1926 in Shaker Heights, Ohio, was already a certified Hollywood icon by the time our story takes place. With those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through the camera and into your soul, Newman had conquered Hollywood with performances in The Hustler, Cool Hand Luke, and HUD. But Newman was more than just a pretty face with acting chops. He was a race car driver, a philanthropist who would eventually donate over $550 million to charity through his Newman's own food company, and most importantly for our story, an absolutely relentless practical joker who elevated pranking to an art form. Then there's Robert Redford, born Charles Robert Redford Jr. in 1936 in Santa Monica, California. By the late 1960s, Redford was the epitome of the all-American golden boy. With his sun-kissed good looks, that famous smile, and an acting style that made everything look effortless, Redford was ascending to the throne of Hollywood royalty. But beneath that polished exterior was a man with a wicked sense of humor, a fierce intelligence, and the unfortunate distinction of being Paul Newman's favorite target. These two titans of American cinema first collided on the set of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969, a film that would change both of their lives forever. Director George Roy Hill had a vision: take two of Hollywood's most charismatic actors, put them in the Old West, and let their natural chemistry do the heavy lifting. What Hill didn't anticipate was that he was essentially introducing two mischievous kids who would spend the next several decades trying to outprank each other. When Newman and Redford first met to discuss Butch Cassidy, there was an immediate connection. Newman, already the bigger star, could have pulled rank and demanded the title role of Butch Cassidy, which was originally what the studio wanted. Instead, Newman saw something in Redford that made him do something remarkable. He volunteered to play the Sundance Kid instead, giving Redford the showier role of Butch. This wasn't charity. Newman recognized that Redford's particular energy was perfect for Butch Cassidy's cocky charm, while Newman himself could bring more depth to the quieter, deadlier Sundance Kid. This act of generosity set the tone for their entire relationship. But don't mistake generosity for softness. From day one of filming, Newman made it clear that while he respected Redford as an actor, he was going to make his life hilariously difficult at every opportunity. It started small. Newman would rearrange Redford's dressing room, hide his scripts, or replace his coffee with decaf. Redford, initially taken aback by this behavior from one of Hollywood's biggest stars, quickly realized this was Newman's love language. And so, he fought back. The prank war escalated throughout the filming of Butch Cassidy. Newman once filled Redford's cowboy boots with pudding right before a take. Redford retaliated by having Newman's motorcycle, which he'd ridden to set, completely gift-wrapped in shiny paper with a massive bow on top. Newman responded by calling a local radio station and announcing that Redford was selling his car for $50, first come, first served, and gave out the address of Redford's rental house. Redford woke up to dozens of people knocking on his door at dawn. But here's what made their friendship special. Beneath all the pranks was genuine affection. When the cameras rolled, both men brought their absolute best. They pushed each other to be better, sharper, more authentic. Their on-screen chemistry wasn't acting, it was the real thing. You can see it in every frame of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. When Newman and Redford share the screen, there's an electricity, a sense that these two men genuinely enjoy each other's company even as they're trying to figure out how to prank each other next. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was an absolute phenomenon. Released in 1969, it became the highest-grossing film of the year, earning over $100 million domestically, which in today's money would be well over $500 million. Critics loved it. Audiences couldn't get enough of it. That iconic scene with Newman and Redford on the bicycle, with Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head playing in the background, became permanently etched in American pop culture consciousness. The film's final freeze frame, with Butch and Sundance charging towards certain death in a blaze of glory, gave audiences one of the most memorable endings in cinema history. But more than the box office or the critical acclaim, Butch Cassidy proved something important. Newman and Redford together were box office gold. Hollywood is a business, and when something works, the industry wants to repeat it. So it was only a matter of time before someone figured out how to reunite this dynamic duo. That someone was director George Roy Hill, who had helmed Butch Cassidy and witnessed firsthand the magic that happened when Newman and Redford shared the screen. Hill had acquired the rights to a script called The Sting, an elaborate con-man story set in 1930s Chicago. The script, written by David S. Ward, was clever, intricate, and required two leads who could sell absolute trust and friendship while also pulling off the greatest con in movie history. Hill knew exactly who to call. By 1973, when The Sting went into production, both Newman and Redford's stars had risen even higher. Newman had continued to prove his dramatic range, while Redford had become one of the most bankable leading men in Hollywood. Reuniting them wasn't just good business, it was necessary. Audiences were hungry for more of that Newman-Redford magic, that indefinable chemistry that made their scenes together feel like watching two jazz musicians improvising perfectly in sync. The Sting had a much bigger budget than Butch Cassidy and much higher expectations. Universal Studios knew they had something special, and they gave Hill the resources to make something spectacular. The production design was elaborate, recreating 1930s Chicago with meticulous detail. The costumes, designed by the legendary Edith, who would win an Academy Award for her work on the film, were period-perfect masterpieces. Three-piece suits, fedoras, wingtip shoes, suspenders, pocket watches. Every element was carefully chosen to transport audiences back to the Depression era. This attention to costume detail is important for our story because it was in one of these elaborate period costumes that Paul Newman would hide something that would become the stuff of Hollywood legend. During the production of The Sting, the Newman-Redford prank war reached new heights. They'd had 4 years to stew since Butch Cassidy, for years to plan and plot and scheme. Newman arrived on set with an arsenal of practical jokes that would have made a comedy writer jealous. Redford, determined not to be outdone, brought his A-game as well. One of the most famous pranks from The Sting involved a scene where Redford's character, Johnny Hooker, was supposed to be drunk. Redford decided to really sell it by doing multiple takes with various levels of manufactured inebriation. Newman, watching from off-camera, was so amused that he arranged for the craft services table to be stocked exclusively with Redford's least favorite foods for an entire week. Redford couldn't prove it was Newman, but he knew. He always knew. Newman once had Redford's trailer moved to the opposite side of the lot without telling him. Redford showed up one morning to find an empty space where his trailer had been and spent 20 minutes searching for it while Newman watched from his own trailer, laughing so hard he was crying. Redford's revenge was swift and devastating. He had Newman's prized Porsche, which Newman had driven to set, completely disassembled and rebuilt inside Newman's own living room. Newman came home to find his car in his house with no obvious way to get it out. It took a construction crew to remove part of a wall. The crew of The Sting quickly learned that being on a Newman Redford set meant being part of an ongoing comedy show. But they also learned to stay alert, because sometimes they'd get caught in the crossfire. Both actors were known to recruit crew members for their pranks, promising favors or autographs, or simply appealing to their sense of humor. The set became a place where anything could happen at any moment. Now we get to the heart of our story, the moment that became legendary. The exact shooting day varies depending on who tells the story, but most accounts place it somewhere in the middle of production, when everyone was comfortable with each other and the prank war was at its peak. They were filming a crucial scene in a crowded pool hall. Redford's character, Johnny Hooker, was supposed to walk through the hall, make contact with Newman's character, Henry Gondorff, and set in motion the next phase of their elaborate con. It was a relatively simple scene from a performance standpoint, but it required extras, careful choreography, and multiple camera angles. In other words, it was expensive to shoot, and any mistakes would cost the production time and money. Redford was wearing one of Edith Head's masterpiece costumes, a perfectly tailored 1930s three-piece suit, complete with a vest, jacket, pocket square, and all the accompanying accessories. The costume had multiple pockets, jacket pockets, vest pockets, trouser pockets, all of which needed to be checked by the costume department to ensure they maintained the proper silhouette and didn't create any unwanted bulges that would ruin the period authenticity. Here's where Newman saw his opportunity. During a break in filming, while Redford was consulting with George Roy Hill about the scene, Newman quietly approached one of the costume assistants. Newman had charm that could convince anyone to do anything, and he used every ounce of it to recruit this poor, unsuspecting costume assistant into his scheme. The assistant, starstruck and amused, agreed to help Newman pull off what would become the most talked-about prank in their entire friendship. What did Newman hide in Redford's costume? The answer depends on which version of the story you hear. Some accounts say it was a rubber snake. Others claim it was a crude drawing of a particularly anatomical nature. A few people swear it was a whoopee cushion strategically placed in the vest pocket. But the most reliable sources, including interviews with crew members who were there, confirm that Newman hid a small, battery-operated adult toy in the inner pocket of Redford's vest. Let me be clear, this wasn't just about shocking Redford. Newman's genius was in the timing. He didn't hide it in an obvious pocket where Redford might discover it before cameras rolled. He placed it in the vest's inner pocket, the kind of pocket that you wouldn't normally reach into during the course of a regular day. But Newman knew the script. He knew that in this particular scene, Redford's character was supposed to reach into his vest pocket to pull out a pocket watch to check the time. Newman had essentially planted a time bomb, and all he had to do was wait for it to detonate. George Roy Hill called for places. The extras filed into the pool hall set. The camera operators checked their angles. The sound crew adjusted their boom mics. Redford took his position at one end of the pool hall, preparing to make his entrance. Newman stood at his mark, playing cards with several extras, looking for all the world like he was just another actor focused on the scene. But those who knew Newman well could see the telltale signs: a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, a suspicious brightness in those famous blue eyes, the way he kept glancing at Redford when he thought no one was looking. "Action," Hill called. Redford began his walk through the pool hall. He moved with that characteristic grace, every gesture perfectly calibrated to suggest a small-time con man trying to look bigger than he was. The cameras tracked him as he navigated through the extras, past the pool tables, toward Newman's position. Everything was going perfectly. This was going to be a first-take keeper. Then came the moment. Redford's character was supposed to check his pocket watch. The script called for him to pull it out, glance at it, and then put it back, a small gesture that would signal to Newman's character that the timing for their con was right. Redford reached into his vest pocket. His fingers closed around something that was definitely not a pocket watch. The change in Redford's expression was immediate and magnificent. Confusion flashed across his face first, followed quickly by realization, then shock, then the desperate attempt not to laugh that comes when you absolutely cannot laugh, but you know something is hilariously wrong. His hand came out of his pocket holding not a pocket watch but Newman's surprise, which depending on the account was either buzzing, squeaking, or simply existing in all its shocking glory. For a split second, The entire set was silent. Redford stood there, frozen, holding this object and staring at it like it was an alien artifact. Then his eyes snapped up and locked onto Newman, who had abandoned all pretense of staying in character and was now grinning like the Cheshire Cat. The moment their eyes met, Newman lost it. He started laughing so hard he had to lean on the pool table for support. That's when the dam broke. Redford started laughing. The extras started laughing. The camera operators started laughing. George Roy Hill, who probably should have been annoyed that his expensive shot was ruined, started laughing. Within seconds, the entire set was in chaos, with over 100 people laughing so hard that some of them had tears streaming down their faces. Cut. Hill finally managed to yell through his laughter.
Paul.
What the hell did you do? Newman couldn't answer. He was laughing too hard. Redford, still holding the offending object, tried to say something but could only shake his head and laugh. The script supervisor later said it took nearly 15 minutes for everyone to calm down enough to even attempt filming again. And even then, for the rest of the day, random crew members would start giggling whenever they looked at either Newman or Redford. That prank became instant legend on the set of The Sting. By the next day, everyone in Hollywood seemed to know about it. The story spread through the industry like wildfire, growing and evolving with each retelling. Some versions became more elaborate, others more crude, but the essential truth remained. Paul Newman had pulled off the ultimate on-set prank, and Robert Redford had been the perfect victim. But here's what makes the story even better: Redford's response. Lesser actors might have gotten angry or embarrassed. Redford did neither. Once he stopped laughing, his first words to Newman were, "You're dead. You know that, right? You're absolutely dead." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Redford was declaring war, and Newman couldn't have been more delighted. Redford's revenge came a few weeks later. Newman had a love for expensive watches, and he'd been wearing a particularly prized Rolex on set. One day, Newman took it off to film a scene where his character was supposed to wash his hands. When he came back, the watch was gone. He searched everywhere, enlisted the help of crew members, even offered a reward. Nothing. The watch had vanished. 3 days later, Newman received a package at his home. Inside was his watch, perfectly intact, but with one modification. Redford had had the back engraved with a message that read, "Found this in my costume. Thought you might want it back.
Bob."
Newman laughed for an hour straight. This back and forth defined their relationship for decades. Even after The Sting wrapped and both men went on to other projects, the pranks continued. Newman once sent Redford a badly wrecked car crusher as a gift, which was delivered on a flatbed truck to Redford's property. Redford responded by having the crusher cut into pieces and turned into a modern art sculpture, which he then donated to a local museum in Newman's name. Newman loved it. The Sting was released in December 1973, and it was an immediate sensation. Critics raved about the intricate plot, the period-perfect production design, and especially the chemistry between Newman and Redford. Audiences flocked to theaters, making it the highest-grossing film of 1973 and eventually earning over $159 million domestically, an astronomical sum for that era. But The Sting was more than just a box office hit. It won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for George Roy Hill, Best Original Screenplay for David S. Ward, and Best Costume Design for Edith Head. The film's ragtime score, featuring Scott Joplin's The Entertainer, arranged by Marvin Hamlish, sparked a revival of interest in ragtime music and won Hamlish an Oscar for Best Original Song Score. Yet for all the accolades and awards, what people remember most about The Sting is Newman and Redford. Their performances elevated what could have been a clever conman movie into something transcendent. You believed these two men had known each other for years. You believed they trusted each other implicitly. You believed in their friendship because you could see the real friendship underneath the acting. And that friendship, with all its pranks and laughter and genuine affection, is what made the costume incident so perfect. It wasn't mean-spirited or designed to humiliate. It was one friend making another friend laugh, even if that laugh came at the most inconvenient moment possible. It was Newman's way of saying, "I know you well enough to know exactly how to get you," and Redford's laughter was his way of saying, "Yeah, you got me, but just wait." The Newman-Redford friendship became a blueprint for male bonding in Hollywood. Before them, male friendships on screen often felt stiff and formal, constrained by the masculine stereotypes of the era. Newman and Redford showed that men could be affectionate, playful, and emotionally open with each other while still being undeniably masculine. Their on-screen chemistry paved the way for other buddy films, from Lethal Weapon to Rush Hour to The Nice Guys. Off-screen, their friendship remained rock solid until Newman's death in 2008. Even as both men aged and their careers took different paths, Newman focusing more on his racing and his charity work, Redford building his Sundance Institute, and focusing on directing, they remained close. They didn't work together again after The Sting, which some fans mourned, but they understood something important. They'd already achieved perfection twice. Why risk diminishing it? Redford spoke about Newman at length after his death, and the pain was genuine. "Paul was one of the best friends I ever had," Redford said in an interview. "We didn't talk every day, or even every month, but when we did connect, it was like no time had passed. And he never stopped trying to prank me, right up until the end. I got a package about 2 months before he died. Inside was a rubber chicken and a note that said, 'Found this in your trailer from 1973. Thought you might want it back.' That was Paul, always getting the last laugh." But as Redford also noted, Newman didn't get the last laugh. After Newman's death, Redford arranged for a donation to Newman's Hole in the Wall Gang Camp, a summer camp for children with serious illnesses that Newman had founded. The donation was substantial, and Redford made it anonymously. But he attached a note that only Newman's widow, Joan Woodward, would see. The note read, "Paul spent 40 years pranking me. Consider this my final prank on him. Doing something nice that he can't retaliate for. I win. Bob." You might be wondering why a story about a practical joke on a movie set in 1973 matters today. We live in an era of viral videos, elaborate YouTube pranks, and social media feuds that are often more performance than genuine. The Newman-Redford friendship, with all its pranks and laughter, feels almost quaint by comparison. But that's exactly why it matters. In an industry known for its egos, its competitiveness, and its often toxic masculinity, Newman and Redford showed that it was possible to be at the top of your profession while also being genuinely kind to the people around you. Their pranks weren't designed to go viral or generate publicity. They were private jokes between friends, shared with whoever happened to be lucky enough to witness them. The costume incident, in particular, represents something beautiful about their relationship. Newman didn't plan that prank for weeks or hire a team to execute it. He saw an opportunity, thought it would be funny, and acted on an impulse. It was spontaneous, silly, and ultimately harmless. And Redford's response, laughter instead of anger, amusement instead of embarrassment, showed that he understood the spirit in which it was offered. This is increasingly rare in our modern world, where every interaction is scrutinized, recorded, and judged by thousands of strangers online. Newman and Redford existed in a different era, one where you could pull a prank on your friend without worrying about it ending up on TMZ or becoming a Twitter controversy. The purity of their friendship, uncomplicated by social media or public relations concerns, is something worth celebrating and perhaps even trying to recapture in our own lives. It's also worth noting that beneath all the pranks and laughter, both Newman and Redford were consummate professionals. The costume incident might have ruined one take, but they didn't let it derail the production. Once everyone stopped laughing, they got back to work. They hit their marks, delivered their lines, and created movie magic. The prank war never interfered with the work itself, which is a testament to both men's professionalism. This balance between playfulness and professionalism is something that many modern actors could learn from. Newman and Redford understood that you could have fun on set while still respecting the process, the crew, and the considerable money being invested in the production. They never let their friendship become an excuse for unprofessional behavior. The pranks happened during breaks or in moments that didn't affect the shooting schedule. When the cameras rolled, they were all business. George Roy Hill, who directed both Butch Cassidy and The Sting, often spoke about how easy both men were to work with despite their prank war. They drove each other crazy, Hill said in an interview, but they never drove me crazy. When I needed them to be serious, they were serious. When I needed them to be funny, they were funny. And when I needed them to have chemistry, well, that they had in spades. To fully appreciate the Newman-Redford friendship and the costume incident specifically, you need to understand the cultural moment in which it occurred. The early 1970s were a transformative time in American cinema. The old studio system was dying, and a new generation of filmmakers was creating movies that were grittier, more realistic, and more willing to challenge social norms. Films like The Godfather, Chinatown, and The Exorcist were pushing boundaries and asking difficult questions. The Sting, in some ways, was a counterpoint to this trend. It was a throwback, a celebration of old-fashioned entertainment done with modern sensibilities. It didn't try to be edgy or controversial. It was a film about friendship, loyalty, and pulling off the perfect con, wrapped in gorgeous production design and anchored by two movie stars who genuinely liked each other. In an era of anti-heroes and moral ambiguity, The Sting offered something simpler: good guys who were fun to watch. The costume prank fits perfectly into this context. It wasn't crude for the sake of being crude, though it certainly was crude. It was Newman reminding everyone that despite all the artistry and craft that went into making movies, at the end of the day, this was supposed to be fun. The fact that Redford and the entire crew could laugh about it showed that they hadn't lost sight of that fundamental truth. There are genuine lessons to be extracted from the costume incident, believe it or not. First, it demonstrates the importance of knowing your audience. Newman knew Redford well enough to know that this prank would make him laugh rather than offend him. He understood the boundaries of their friendship and knew exactly where the line was. This kind of emotional intelligence is rare and valuable, not just in friendships, but in all human relationships. Second, it shows the value of not taking yourself too seriously. Redford was one of the biggest movie stars in the world when this happened. He could have gotten angry or embarrassed. Instead, he laughed and immediately started planning his revenge. That ability to laugh at yourself, to not let your ego dictate your response, is a sign of genuine confidence and maturity. Third, the incident reminds us that the best memories often come from unexpected moments. Nobody planned for the costume prank to become legendary. It wasn't scripted or choreographed. It was spontaneous and messy and completely unplanned. Yet it became one of the most talked about moments from the entire production of The Sting, more memorable to the people who were there than many of the actual scenes in the movie. Finally, it illustrates the power of genuine friendship. Newman and Redford's bond wasn't based on networking or career advancement. They genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The pranks were expressions of that affection, ways of saying, "I'm thinking about you, and you're important enough to me that I want to make you laugh." In Hollywood, where relationships are often transactional, this kind of authentic connection was and remains extraordinarily rare. One of the charming aspects of the costume incident is that despite all the retellings, nobody is entirely sure exactly what Newman hid. Both men, when asked about it in interviews, would smile mysteriously and change the subject. Crew members who were there have given different accounts. This ambiguity has only added to the legend, allowing each person who hears the story to imagine their own version. This uncertainty is actually perfect. It means the prank belongs to everyone who hears about it. Each person can picture what they think is funniest, what would have made them laugh the hardest. The prank becomes a collaborative act of imagination, with Newman and Redford at the center, but with room for everyone else to participate in the joke. It's also worth noting that both men respected each other enough to keep some details private. In an era before social media, this was easier, but it was still a choice. They could have sold the story to talk shows or used it for publicity. Instead, they let it remain a semi-private moment, shared with the crew who witnessed it but not exploited for commercial gain. This restraint speaks to the character of both men. Paul Newman passed away on September 26, 2008, from lung cancer. He was 83 years old. The outpouring of grief from Hollywood and beyond was immense. Newman had spent his life being not just a great actor but a great human being, donating hundreds of millions to charity and using his fame to make the world better. But among all the tributes and memorials, some of the most touching came from Robert Redford. Redford spoke at Newman's memorial service, and he told stories. Stories about pranks, about laughter, about two young actors who became old friends. He told the costume story, finally filling in some of the details that had been missing for decades, and the entire memorial laughed through their tears. Paul would have loved this, Redford said. He always said the best pranks were the ones people remembered forever. Well, Paul, we remember. We'll always remember. In the years since Newman's death, Redford has continued to honor his friend's memory. He's supported Newman's charities, particularly the Hole in the Wall gang camp. He's spoken about their friendship in interviews, always with warmth and affection. And occasionally, when asked about the old days, he'll smile that famous smile and say, "Paul Newman was the best friend I ever had and the biggest pain in the ass I ever met. I miss him every day." So, what are we to make of this story? What does it tell us about Paul Newman, Robert Redford, Hollywood in the 1970s, and friendship in general? Perhaps the most important lesson is this. Life is short, but laughter makes it feel longer. Newman and Redford understood that despite all the pressure, all the fame, all the money and accolades, the thing that mattered most was the relationships they built and the joy they created. The costume incident wasn't just a prank. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered joy shared by two friends and witnessed by dozens of lucky people. It was a reminder that even in the serious business of making movies, there's always room for laughter. It was Newman's way of telling Redford, "I see you, I know you, and I care enough about you to make you laugh." And it was Redford's way of saying, "I received that gift and I give it back to you." That's what makes this story worth telling more than 50 years later. Not because it's particularly shocking or scandalous, but because it's human. It's two men at the top of their profession finding joy in making each other laugh. It's a crew of hardworking people getting an unexpected break in their day to witness something genuinely funny. It's proof that even in the glamorous, often cynical world of Hollywood, there's still room for innocence, playfulness, and genuine affection. The next time you watch Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid or The Sting, pay attention to the way Newman and Redford look at each other. Notice the small smiles, the easy comfort, the sense that these two men genuinely enjoy being in each other's presence. That wasn't acting. That was real. And somewhere in the back of your mind, remember that one day on the set of The Sting, Paul Newman hid something in Robert Redford's costume that made the entire crew lose it. Remember that these titans of cinema were also just two friends trying to make each other laugh. Remember that the best moments in life are often unscripted, unexpected, and absolutely perfect in their spontaneity. That's the real magic of the costume incident. Not what was hidden, but what was revealed. A friendship for the ages, a joy that transcended the screen, and a reminder that no matter how serious life gets, there's always room for a good prank between friends. Newman and Redford gave us incredible performances, unforgettable films, and characters that will live forever. But perhaps their greatest gift was showing us what genuine friendship looks like, complete with pranks, laughter, and the occasional item hidden in a costume pocket that makes everyone on set completely lose it.